And good morning, everybody, or good afternoon, whatever time you are seeing this. We are presenting our last screencast of the period between the wars, and it's how the democracies of the West react to the Great Depression. The Great Depression ended forever Western democracies' hands-off or laissez-faire treatment of business. Each of the countries will have increased role in the government, and how it manages the economy or how it aids people in times of suffering. Worldwide, the effects of the Great Depression are felt in almost every nation to some effect, with the exception of Germany, whose economy really skyrockets in the 1930s at a great cost to civil liberty and other things. It really wasn't until World War II that the United States recovers, and it's because of the need for mass industrial growth and buildup that the private sector and industry finally starts clicking. We can look at this chart here, and you can see that the only nation that really rises, Germany, starts and they drop quite dramatically like everyone else, but look how fast they grow, and this is the time period after the Nazis take over. And I'm not saying that it was a good thing that the Nazis took over, but it did change the economy because of their policies. The United Kingdom actually had a rather flat drop. They did have a drop, but not nearly as much, and partly it's because of how they changed their role. They did have a much more increased role of government and planning industry, and instituted a lot of the ideas of the Labour Party, the Liberal Party, and the Conservative Party in a coalition government. So the Great Depression was not as severely felt in Great Britain. If you look at Italy again adopts they don't have a really strong hit, but they're not as closely tied to the United States as the other countries were, and Germany suffered from Versailles, of course. So their drop was there, but not as significant, and they rose pretty well, and then they flatlined as the cost of war that they were waging in Africa started to bleed on the economy. And they also had adopted a fascist type of government. The United States has a really horrible drop. Look at how bad it drops. I mean, it's way up, way up here at the beginning of the Great Depression. They get hit the worst. And while they rise under Roosevelt's New Deal, which we'll be talking about, they never really get that strong, and then they flatline again. They just drop again. It takes World War II to get the United States economy going. France drops, and they never really recover. And that's partly because of the really weak government and the fractured nature of France's government. So there are some changes in the politics. Britain changes to a coalition government and does have more regulation by the government, and definitely introduces more socialist policies. Overall, they are in recovery by 1938, but then the war is going to start in 1939, and it's going to smash the economy again, just like World War II, and again, knock Great Britain down from its higher place in the world order and making them not really a superpower anymore. France felt the pain later than most countries, and maybe their hit wasn't as great, but they never really recover that well. They have a high level of socialism, and they become very much a center-left nation economically. They also have a lot of social changes that the center-left brings about. The communists become a very large part of the government in France, and they're not satisfied. They want communism. And this causes the center-left coalition to be very weak. And France, again, is just marked by weak leadership, corruption, and a very poor recovery with an extreme level of discontent in the citizens. The United States, Roosevelt becomes president in 1932, promising a New Deal to America. And he greatly increases the federal role, particularly in the banking and stock market, guaranteeing safety for citizens with things like the FDIC, which protects people's wealth in banks, and regulations in the stock market with the formation of a Security and Exchange Commission that keeps stock markets investors from cheating and pouring a lot of money into risky stock and ruining people's investment. A safety net is provided for. The Social Security system is set up. Again, laws to protect banks and investments are brought about. There's a massive increase in public works of infrastructure. You can go all across America and look at schools and see how many of them were built in the 1930s. This is all part of the New Deal. Highways were built. You have a lot of public works all over the place, improving land, national monuments, national parks are all over the place. These are all federal programs that were meant to stimulate the economy, but they really don't stimulate the economy. They create jobs, but they don't have a real effect on the industry of America because they're not making things. Again, you still have a glut overproduction from the 1920s that is still taking place in America, and people just don't have the money to buy things, so industry is not doing well. If you look at the unemployment rates in the United States, they remain stable. Productivity is still flat, and jobs. If you look at the jobless rate, the economy, even under Roosevelt, it never gets the unemployment rate never gets better than 15%, which is horrible, and sometimes it's as high as 20%. So it does not. The effect of the economy is overrated in the New Deal. It is not an effective economic policy, but what it does, it gives Americans hope. And Franklin Roosevelt shows leadership in saying we're going to get through this. Now, again, the changes did not really work. It wasn't until World War II and then the post-war period of another great expansion that the American economy moves forward, and really moves forward for quite a sustained time, about 30 years. Roosevelt's policy also do one thing. They split the country on the role and the size of the federal government. We are a federal republic, which is very different than the other democracies, and the idea of that states have a lot of say over what happens versus the federal. Roosevelt changes that and makes the federal government very much in the forefront of the economy of the nation, and it blends into other parts of the national dialogue. And what is the role of the federal government? How big should their role be? Is a real battle between what are called pretty much the economic conservatives, who tend to be a little bit right of center on economy and favor private ownership, and economic progressives, who tend to be favor much more socialism in the economy. That difference exists today. Germany, Italy, and Spain are also democracies when the Great Depression hits. They become fascist states. Now, fascism is an authoritarian government that has ultranationalism, dictatorial power, forcible suppression of opposition, and of strong regimentation of the society and of the economy. All three of these nations do have strong economic growth, although Spain going through a civil war does hurt it, and it's a civil war between fascists and the Republican Party. But the Republican is a little bit of a misnomer. It was also a lot of communists. So it was a battle between the right of center politically and economically, and the left of center, and some more extreme elements too. So it was a fight between left and right, and both sides had issues. And you remember we talk about blood on the hands. The Civil War in Spain is a very brutal civil war. All civil wars are brutal. Germany becomes a Nazi state, and that means it's a national socialist state. They were very nationalistic and they had strong elements of socialism, and they were authoritarian with other traits of fascism. So fascism is the big term, and Nazi refers to Germany. What's the overall political impact of all this? All five leading democracies, and six if you include Spain, although Spain was not really a true democracy, react differently to the Great Depression. The biggest thing is that a lack of faith in the democratic process to solve problems is felt in all five nations, and authoritarianism is and control of the government of key segments of the economy and in some cases personal liberty are felt. There's a large increase in the popularity of communism in all of these countries. There's political instability, and it leads to an increasing role of the state's authority in all countries, including the United States, where many civil liberties are hurt under the name of control. Not so much as the other countries, but certainly in England, in France, and certainly in Germany and Italy, that is very much a trademark. Finally, this political instability leads the state to having more authority. If you control the economy, you control a large part of natural rights, you might say, because that's property. And it directly contributes to nations being on a crash course with these ideologies, especially the authoritarianism and the restriction of human rights and the aggressive nationalism of Italy and Germany is going to cause a civil war. It causes a civil war in Spain, and that which is kind of like a dress rehearsal for what is later World War II. I know this was a longer screencast, but this is such an important topic, and I want to make sure that those of you who are in Adventum or who are absent get a real understanding of this period in history. The Great Depression is a real tough spot for the world. Now, our nation luckily got through it in some ways better off, and you can make a very strong argument that Roosevelt shows real leadership in that he was a dealer in hope. Remember, we talked about Napoleon saying that a leader is someone who deals hope, and the New Deal gave people the hope that someone had their back and they would not be destroyed by this horrible economic time period. That's all for today. Have a great day, and remember, it's a great day to be a rougher.